Welcome back, everybody, to DA Sports. I'm your host, DASASI, and I want to thank you guys all. This is episode number 3. I greatly appreciate everyone who tuned in to the first 2 episodes and the shorts from those episodes. This episode, we're going to recap some of the things that I predicted from the previous episode, including UFC 306 and week 2 of the NFL season. So let's go ahead and get into it. To start off, we're going to talk about my predictions from Saturday. So if you remember from Saturday, I talked about UFC 306, and overall it was a great card. If you listen to it and then follow the picks that I predicted, you will be a very happy person. I was 5-0 with the picks that I made for that card. I mentioned the 2 people in the prelims, Raul Rosas Jr. and Ignacio Bahamondes. So also another fighter on the prelims that was actually an underdog in the fight, but he did win his fight, as I mentioned. The last 3 main fights on the UFC 306 card, it was Lopez beating Ortega. It was Shevchenko beating Grasso. Now, I did mention, to be fair, that I was rooting for Grasso. I also mentioned that I was rooting for Ortega, but I did say that that Lopez was likely going to win, and I did say it was a smart bet to bet on Shevchenko because you never get Shevchenko with plus money, and she was plus 115 before the fight. The final fight was O'Malley and Merab Dvalishvili, and I did say that I think Merab was going to get the win because of his pressure, and sure enough, he did. So in terms of UFC 306, I was 5-0. It was a great pick for Saturday, and I hope you guys followed. Speaking of UFC 306 as a whole, the event was amazing. The visuals were beyond any other fighting event ever, whether it be MMA fighting or boxing, anything for that measure. I can only imagine how great it looked to be in the Sphere on that night. Just from the viewpoint we got from the camera view, it looked amazing. The storytelling between each fight, the whole production was definitely A1. You could see where Dana White put all $20 million into making it what it was. Definitely wish I could have been there. And if he ever does it again, I'm definitely going to try to make it there because it looked spectacular. I'm sure he's very proud of everything they did. He did mention in an interview after all of the fights that the only hiccup they had was when they showed Terrence Crawford on screen and had a title saying it was Kendrick Lamar. That was definitely a blunder. I caught it as soon as it happened live. But other than that, as far as the production, the score, the visuals, and the fights, it was a great card and definitely not disappointing at all. So other than the predictions from Saturday, let's talk about my predictions from Sunday. Now, if anybody else follows the trends of betting for Sunday, you'll know that the general public got hit pretty hard. Most of the favorites, whether it be spread or even money line, lost last week. There were a lot of upsets, and I was a part of some of those upsets too. So let's get to it. The first part was the pick 3. So my pick 3 last week was Kansas City, San Francisco, and the Rams. Unfortunately for my pick 3 for week 2, I went 1-2. Kansas City won, beating Cincinnati on a last-second field goal. San Francisco and the Rams both lost. Now, just speaking about each of those 3 games in that pick 3, the Kansas City game was a nail-biter. Every time Kansas City and Cincinnati play each other, it's always close, which is why I was a little weary of that 6-point spread. It came down to the end of the game. For some reason, people are trying to say that the last pass interference call was controversial. I don't know why, because that call is made probably 90% of the time. The defender clearly made contact with the receiver before the ball was there. It's kind of a no-brainer call. And to all of these crazy people talking about, oh, it's a conspiracy, the refs literally called back a huge play. The previous one, right before that play on 3rd down, where Travis Kelce ended up with like a 50-yard gain. So if there was some sort of random conspiracy that everybody was in on, they definitely wouldn't have called back a play that was done by Travis Kelce to then throw a penalty on the next play that was headed to Rashee Rice. So that obviously doesn't make any sense. But outside of the nonsense from just random commentary, the game was great. It went back and forth. It's actually kind of showed the strength of the Chiefs, considering the fact that I believe Mahomes played the worst game of his entire career and against a solid team, and they still managed to win. So that's a great sign for them. As for the other two upsets that I was wrong about, San Francisco and Minnesota, it was a close game, but Minnesota pretty much handled San Francisco from jump. It was a very exciting game, including Justin Jefferson scoring on a 97-yard receiving touchdown. That was fantastic. So that was definitely a surprise. Really elevated Minnesota, and it might show a little bit of chinks in the armor with some of the injuries that San Francisco was dealing with. Even though Mason did rush for over 100 yards like I predicted, they still wasn't enough, and they ended up losing. And then the last one that I picked was the Rams over the Cardinals. Now, it's interesting because going into the game, I thought the line was kind of suspicious. Like, based on how both teams played in week one, why was Arizona still favored? Well, that's why those people are the experts, because Arizona completely demolished the Rams from the jump. It showed why they were favored at home. The Rams just had no answer for the Cardinals, even from the beginning of the game. Kyler Murray probably put together one of the best performances he's had in a long time. He finally got his rookie receiver involved, and Marvin Harrison Jr. did not disappoint, going wild all over the field. So I was 1-2 in my pick 3 for the week. My lock pick of the week, which was supposed to be the easy one, I was wrong about that one too. So 0-1 to start on lock of the week. For those that didn't see it, my lock of the week for week 2 was Baltimore over Las Vegas. And Baltimore was leading comfortably, and then they choked at the end of the game. Being in Southern California, most of my friends and family are Raiders fans. So, of course, everybody who's a Raider fan is ecstatic. But I bet you if you asked most of them before the game, they probably didn't think they were going to win. But it's the NFL, and anything can happen on any given Sunday. And the Raiders were able to pull it off, which was definitely a bad look for the Ravens. The last pick, though, out of the 5 games that I picked for Sunday was my underdog pick of the week. Now, if you didn't see it, my underdog pick of the week was the New Orleans Saints beating the Dallas Cowboys, even though they were 6-point underdog going into the game. Well, I was right about that one. So at least on the underdog pick, I was 1-0 for the week. So overall, it was 2-3 between the 5 games picked. Not the start that I wanted, but based on odds, if you actually bet the Saints money line to win, you actually would have made more money off of that than the losses that we had in the other 3 games that I was wrong about. But nonetheless, like I said, I always hold myself accountable. 2-3 is not the way it's usually going to go, but that's how it was for week 2. And that's how it was for most people who made predictions during last week's games. Now, aside from the games that I picked, let's talk about a few other things to recap from week 2. So for starters, we'll talk about the Carolina Panthers. They're still terrible. It was just announced a couple days ago that Bryce Young is going to be benched, and he's going to be replaced by Andy Dalton. So Andy Dalton definitely has experience in the league, been around for a long time. I guess they feel like the season is slipping away, which is odd because I don't know why they thought they were going to have a successful season anyway, considering all of the great players that they had on their team that they traded away in the last 2 years. They got rid of DJ Moore. They got rid of Brian Burns. People forget, they got rid of Christian McCaffrey. So, when you lose that kind of talent in order to try to restructure things and you bring in a rookie, I mean, this is kind of the result. And their offensive line is terrible. If you watch the tape from that game, their offensive line is getting obliterated pretty much every play. So even though I think, yes, there are some things that Bryce Young needs to improve on, he's kind of stuck in a terrible situation. And it's kind of unfortunate that 2 games into his second season, he's already being benched. Hopefully he can recover from it, but if not, it's on Carolina. And they've had some ownership issues, so it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward, and we'll keep monitoring that. Other than that, there were a couple of big upsets alongside the ones that I got wrong, one of which being the Lions. The Detroit Lions lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It was a great game, back and forth. Baker Mayfield outplayed Jared Goff, and Baker Mayfield showed why he was at one point the number 1 pick in the draft. He's definitely had a resurgence to his career since being in Tampa Bay. And, his weapons around him are really good, and they seem to have great chemistry. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are very consistent, and they were able to go into Detroit and pull off the win. So that was a big upset. And the last upset of the week actually happened last night on Monday Night Football with the Philadelphia Eagles and the Atlanta Falcons. Now, granted, as I mentioned in episode 1, I do like the Atlanta Falcons. They're my second favorite team in the NFL, so I was happy that they won. But I did not expect them to win based on how the game was going. The Eagles were pretty dominant in the game. The only thing is that Atlanta was running the ball on Philadelphia the entire game with ease, but Atlanta couldn't really stop Philadelphia, especially when they had their explosive plays. Saquon Barkley was going off, yet they choked the game away at the end. Now, I don't fault the pass play that Saquon Barkley dropped. It was a great play. It was playing against the idea that Atlanta was going to bring pressure up the middle to stop the run, and they got the look that they wanted. He was wide open. He just dropped the ball. And the defense still had a chance to stop Atlanta. It was only I believe, a minute 40 left in the game. And Atlanta then had their best drive of the entire game when they needed it most, in a situation that Kirk Cousins hasn't been known to be great at. But he was definitely great in that last drive. I honestly think that the secondary coverage from Philadelphia was way softer than it needs to be. They were playing like a prevent defense, almost like they were up by 10 points when they were only up 6. I think they kind of botched that part of it too. That's why they play the games, because you never know what's going to happen. And then even after they scored, Philadelphia got the ball back but weren't able to score, and Hurts ended up throwing an interception in the game. So that was definitely another upset. It kind of speaks to, like I said, all the upsets that happened. That was pretty shocking. The other thing I want to get into as a recap from last week is all of the injuries. Now, the injuries this week have been terrible. For those of you that play fantasy football, I know a lot of people are having to reshuffle lineups, me included. 3 of the biggest injuries of the week. Isaiah Pacheco, unfortunately for my Chiefs, they said he's going to be out 6 to 8 weeks, which is really bad. I know we just brought in Kareem Hunt to try to add to the team since he's familiar with the offense. And then now it looks like our rookie Carson Steele is going to be the starter. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is still injured. So hopefully they can kind of get it done running back by committee. But the way Pacheco runs, there's nobody who really runs like him. Steele does run hard, but he doesn't have the same speed as Pacheco. So it'll definitely be interesting. It'll put more pressure on Mahomes. And considering the way he played last game, that may not be a good thing. But I'm sure Andy Reid will figure out some sort of combination of players to get the job done. Another big injury was Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp was, obviously he's Matt Stafford's favorite target, and Puka Nacua went down the week before, so he knew he was going to get a bunch of targets, and he didn't even get to finish the game, which I know for Stafford has got to be killing him. His best 2 receivers go down in back-to-back weeks, and they said Cooper Kupp is going to be out 2 to 3 weeks or so, so bad on top of bad. And then another injury was Deebo Samuel. Now, Deebo, like Kupp, is injured pretty often, unfortunately. So this is the next tale of his injury saga where he's missing games. I think the last report I saw, they think he's going to be out for a couple weeks, but we'll see more with the update. But yep, that amount of injuries this early into the season is very troubling. A lot of adjustments needing to be made. A lot of teams having to restructure things to figure out how to either stay on track or get back on track, and we'll see what goes forward. A lot of people that are going to be in positions to step up, which could, make their careers. A lot of players have found a way to get a chance by getting into a spot due to an injury. Tom Brady obviously being the most famous of all of those that had to do that. So who knows? Maybe one of these guys filling in will be the next Tom Brady-ish in terms of getting an opportunity and then making the most of it. So that is the recap for week 2. To finish off the episode, it's now time to get into my top 5 and worst 5 rankings after NFL week number 2. Now, this is probably one of the hardest rankings that I had to come up with, mainly because there were so many upset losses. Out of my top 5 last week, I believe 3 of those teams lost. And I believe out of the bottom 5 from last week, I believe 3 of those teams won. So it's a huge toss-up. For those that are new to my top 5 and worst 5 list, it's pretty much up in the air in terms of after there are at least 1 loss or 1 win by every team in the league. But until that point, the top 5, if you're undefeated, you're always going to be above somebody else. Even if I might think that in a head-to-head battle, a team with 1 loss might beat that team that's undefeated. Until you have a loss, you can't be dethroned by somebody who has at least 1 loss. And the same thing goes the other way around. Even if I think one of the teams at the bottom is better than a team who has a win, but they don't have a win, you will never go above a team with a win until you get at least 1 win. So with that being said, the top 5 teams are still all undefeated, and the worst 5 teams are still winless. So for this week's top 5 and worst 5, here it goes. At number 1, I have the Kansas City Chiefs. Even though both of their games have come down to last-second scores or non-scores, they have found a way to win even without playing their best. They've also, out of all the teams that are still undefeated, I feel like have played the best 2 teams. I believe both of the teams that they beat in week 1 and week 2 will eventually be playoff teams. Whereas all of the other teams that are undefeated, I don't think that that's the case. So even though they were number 2 last week, they did move up to number 1. A big part of that is just product of elimination because San Francisco was above them and they lost. And out of all the other teams that are undefeated, they've faced the hardest competition so far. So at number 2, the other team that was in the top 5 last week, which is the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans remain undefeated. They had another tough game against a tough Chicago Bears team, but they did look impressive in the sense that they were able to handle the Bears' tough defense. They were able to make plays when they needed to, and in a consecutive week, they were able to execute and get it done, and C.J. Stroud looks to be carrying on the same way he was from the previous season. So they move up to number 2 this week. At number 3 is the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the New Orleans Saints were my underdog pick of the week, but they've shown that they, as of right now, they have played the most complete football in terms of offense and defense. The only reason I don't have them rank higher is because their week 1 win was against Carolina. And as I mentioned earlier, Carolina is terrible, so I can only give them so much credit for that. Although I was impressed with the way they dominantly beat the Dallas Cowboys in week 2. So right now, the Saints are the number 3 team. At number 4, 4 and 5 I went back and forth with, and I'll tell you what differentiated 4 from 5 because I had them flipped at one point. It's because the team I have at 5 has a key injury, so that's why I'm putting number 4 on top of 5. So at 4, I'm going with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. As I mentioned earlier, they beat the Detroit Lions, which was a huge win, and they showed that they could go into hostile territory against a top 5 team because they were in the top 5 last week and get the job done. And as I mentioned, Baker Mayfield has been playing great. And at number 5, I'm going with the Minnesota Vikings. Again, another team that came into this week as an underdog and had a big win against the San Francisco 49ers. Like I said, Justin Jefferson looked great. Sam Darnold looked great. And if they can keep it rolling, they might be able to stay in this same top 5. My only concern is obviously Justin Jefferson is nicked up. And I believe Jordan Addison is also still out. So we'll see how they do going forward. But they deserve to be number 5 after this week based on their impressive win against the 49ers. So now we're done with the top 5. Let's get into the worst 5. Again, this list has also been jumbled a little bit. So let's get into it. So at number 28, we're going to go with the 0-2 Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars did play 2 games, week 1 and week 2, where they were close. Both were within a touchdown. I believe week 1 they lost by 3 points, and week 2 they lost by 5 points. But with the talent that they have on offense, with the new contract that they gave to Trevor Lawrence, there was just more being expected. I believe in both cases they scored less than 20 points in each game. So, and unfortunately for them, they're in a terrible division. 3 out of the 4 teams in that division are 0-2. So there's an opportunity for them to challenge the Texans, but right now the Texans are running away with it because every other team in that division is 0-2. And so right now I have the Jacksonville Jaguars at 28. At 29, another team in that same division is the Tennessee Titans. Now, going into this season, I expected the Tennessee Titans would be in the bottom 5 for the entire season. But after watching parts of game 1 and game 2, I have to say that they're actually better than I expected. Their defense is really, really good. And I feel like their play calling has been decent. The activity, the energy on the team has been really good. They just are, the only reason they're in this position is because Will Levis looks awful. I mean, awful. Honestly, if you switch Bryce Young for Will Levis, Tennessee might be 2-0 right now. And we already talked about earlier how Bryce Young has looked in Carolina. But Will Levis is just making just the dumbest decisions. You even saw it if some of you who caught the game this past week saw after he did a dumb turnover, you can see the coach walking onto the field saying, "What the hell are you doing?" And it's just really ridiculous, the kind of plays, because they lost the game week 1 against Chicago because he threw a pick six. And the game this week against the Jets was a one-possession game, and he had a dumb turnover in scoring position. You can't win games like that, especially with a team like his where it's pretty much built on playing good defense, keeping the game close, and then winning the game out late. You can't have a quarterback that's going to turn the ball over. So that's the reason why the Tennessee Titans right now are the 4th worst team in the league and ranked 29th overall. Next at 30, I have the Denver Broncos. Now, the Denver Broncos have not been destroyed in both of their games, but they haven't been impressive. I haven't felt like at any point in either of their games that they were actually going to win. We've kind of seen it through all of the rookie quarterbacks who have started from day one. This year, they have not been very productive. Matter of fact, I believe to this point, there's no rookie quarterback in the league who has even thrown 1 touchdown between all of them combined, which is pretty crazy. And Denver, obviously, they're at a disadvantage in terms of overall talent. They're paying a boatload of money just to have Russell Wilson play for the Steelers. So they're kind of limited on their cap space, and it shows on a week-to-week basis. So that's why Denver is at 30. Now at 31, this team actually went up 1. It's the New York Giants. Last week I had them at 32. They moved up to 31 because they did score 3 touchdowns this week. Unfortunately, their kicker got hurt, and for some reason, I guess the punter can't kick extra points or field goals. So even though they scored 3 touchdowns, that was all they got. They finished with 18 points. And even though they were playing the Commanders, who were in the bottom 5 last week, they lost with the Commanders not scoring not a single touchdown. And actually, it was a record. It's the first time that one team scored 3 or more touchdowns and didn't give up any touchdowns, and they lost the game 21-18. So definitely terrible situation. I'm sure they're going to be trying to find a replacement kicker as soon as possible. Maybe even decide to carry a backup kicker just in case something like this happens going forward. But they're still terrible overall. Daniel Jones still looks below average at best. So they're 31 going into week 2. And the 32nd best team, or the worst team in the league, as I mentioned earlier, the Carolina Panthers. They have looked awful. They've barely scored in each game. Their offensive line might be the worst offensive line in the entire league. And like I said, they just made a change at quarterback. Only 2 weeks in, they don't seem to have a real direction with where the team is trying to go. I don't think there's any hope that they'll ever be out of the bottom 5 for the entire season. So be comfortable hearing their name throughout the top 5 and worst 5 throughout the entire season, because I believe that's where they're going to stay. So that's it for the top 5 and worst 5. It's also it for this episode. This is episode 3 again. Again, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share the channel with as many people as you know. I greatly appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Peace.